Hey there, friends. It's David D. This is PRM. And I just want to run a quick note by if you're an Andrew Yang fan, you're going to want to subscribe and click the bell because I do, if you haven't noticed, I cover Andrew Yang a lot. And I probably do 2 or 3 Yang videos a week. And I plan on covering Andrew Yang for the foreseeable future, all the way through next year. So make sure you don't miss a video. Subscribe and click the bell on the side. Okay, so Andrew Yang visited a YouTube channel called Upolitics and gave an interview, and we're going to go over some stuff he said and my commentary and some breakdowns along the way. So let's get into it. Number one, he talked about reforming the Supreme Court. He didn't elaborate on some of these, so I'll go over the ones he elaborated on. But right off the bat, he talked about reforming the Supreme Court. That sounds good. I fully agree with that. I think we could use more justices. I don't know if that's his viewpoint, but I believe we can broaden the scope of our Supreme Court if we wanted to. Number two, he talked about statehood for Puerto Rico and D.C. I think he covered that in his CNN town hall. That's a great stance to have. Let's see. Okay, this is interesting. I haven't heard this. He talked about installing a White House psychologist. He said, quote, "It makes no sense to have people who are in high places, in high-stress environments, who are making decisions that will alter the course of the world and history and not have a psychologist present," end quote. And it just makes sense, because once again, this is Andrew Yang. He's all about logic, facts, making sense. That's why I love Andrew Yang. And he said, quote, "I thought about this way before Donald Trump, too," end quote. And most of us are thinking about that now. But yeah, it's just, these are very simple things. Andrew Yang touches on very simple yet effective things that we could use. And this is something people just miss. A psychologist in the White House. Like, that would make a huge impact. Okay, next he talked about ending robocalls. I mean, that's fairly obvious. We all know why robocalls are annoying. No one picks up their phone anymore, and it's just harassment at this point. So he wants to get a proposal to ban robocalls. Okay, very common sense. This was cool. I don't think I've heard this one. Free marriage counseling for all Americans. And I just like, man, that is so out of the box. I love that. It's like, are we about fixing problems or are we not? Like, why not offer, free counseling for all Americans? It just makes sense. A lot of people just blow over stuff like this. Okay, he also talked about free tax service. The government, he said, quote, "The government has enough information on us Americans that 90% of our taxes should be already filled out." And that makes perfect sense. The government should just give us our information already filled out. We have the technology to do that, but they're just not doing it. So he would implement free tax service that would have about 90% of the information already completed. There's no complications. It's not a complex thing, and you basically have to fill out 10%. Okay, no big deal. Tax day. Make tax day a national holiday. That's another great idea. He talked about pay NCAA athletes. He said this is about exploitation, and it's just fundamentally immoral that the coaches and the administration makes millions of dollars, and these players are getting an education. But he said something like they're getting an education in corruption, which I thought was perfect. Okay, okay. Quintuple the money towards the opiate crisis. And he said a fantastic sentence here. He said, quote, "The opiate crisis is a disease of capitalism," end quote. I just thought that was a fantastic sentence. The opiate crisis is a disease of capitalism. And this is coming from a capitalist. So once again, human-centered capitalism. Morally aware capitalism. This is what Andrew Yang wants to bring. And if we're going to have capitalism, why not have a morally aware capitalism or a human-centered capitalism? So this resonates throughout Andrew's rhetoric, and that's awesome. Next on the list, he talked about legalizing marijuana, and he talked about pardoning all prisoners who are in jail for low-level nonviolent drug offenses. And I don't know why he says this. And I would high five them on the way out of jail. It's like, what? He's got a nice sense of humor. That's what I like about Andrew Yang, too. He's kind of kooky. Okay, so next on the list, paid family leave. This is great. I've heard Bernie talk about this forever. We're like one of 3 or 4 countries in the world, in the modern world, that doesn't have paid family leave, especially for new mothers. It's absolutely obscene and embarrassing, to be quite frank about it. Okay, what else did he talk about? Reducing the cost of college. He doesn't talk about free college. I think he's for reducing the cost, but not free college. But he's for mass forgiveness of student debt. And he talked about how if we forgive student debt, that money will basically become an economic stimulus. Like, instead of going to the debtors in these schools where they're just going to hoard the money, it's going to go directly back into the economy. So you don't have to worry about your student debt. You can actually just spend some money now. So it would act as an economic stimulus, and that's a great perspective to have. What else? Publicly financed elections. He talks about overturning Citizens United. And that's awesome, and that needs to be done. And finally, he talked about a GDP upgrade, and this ties into his human-centered capitalism and how we measure GDP, and how it's not fair, because he talks about like his wife, who takes care of 2 kids, one who is autistic, that her, through the eyes of GDP, she's ignored, but that's some of the hardest work a person is going to do, and it's just like she's completely ignored. So the reframing of GDP, the restructuring of GDP, is something we desperately need to do if we want to maintain this capitalist system. So I love how he talks about that. And yeah, finally, female empowerment, and how UBI would help assist women who are exploited by the way we measure GDP, and how it keeps women in jobs they don't want and exploited in relationships that they don't want, and how UBI would give upward mobility and female and just empowerment. It will empower women to get out of these horrible situations that they're stuck in. So I love how he elaborated on that. It just boils down to upward mobility for these women. So that was a really good interview. Some stuff I've heard before, some stuff I didn't. But I'll leave it down below, and let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe, and click the bell on the side.